whose lives are slipping through their fingers as the fire destroys everything in its path reach the ears of an old sorcerer. He wakes up only to bear witness to the tragic end of his people. In his weary eyes, one can see the deepest pain, while contemplating how everything he once loved falls to pieces under the inclement and devastating power of the fire. Tears flow incessantly from his eyes, a physical expression of the tremendous sadness and frustration that completely overwhelm him in this moment of desperation. In his back, a pair of embedded arrows serve as a constant reminder of how badly wounded he is following the attack. Fueled by an uncontrollable rage, he tears the arrows from his own body. From the sharp tips, his blood drips steadily to the ground as he stares at one of the creatures that destroyed his village, struggling to catch its breath and attempting to stand up from the ashes. Without a single doubt in his soul, the old sorcerer advances with implacable resolve toward his enemy. He lunges at the murderer of his kin and, using the very same arrow that failed to take his life, stabs him repeatedly in the chest until his vengeance is complete. The creature with a human shape but an animal's skull lets out a series of harrowing screams of pain, yet the old man doesn't stop for anything. In his weathered hands lies the vengeance for his people, though he feels that it simply isn't enough. A single death cannot possibly compensate for the hundreds of innocent lives lost. His brothers, friends, and pupils must be avenged, and he knows exactly what needs to be done to achieve it. Without wasting a single second, he rushes toward his hut, which is barely withstanding the encroaching fire. He gathers whatever ingredients he can find, those that have miraculously not been consumed by the flames, and prepares to brew a concoction, a dark potion to help him reach his ultimate goal. As he mixes the ingredients with trembling hands, he realizes that a blood sacrifice must be made to activate the power. Thus, he returns to the attacker he previously killed. With one swift, decisive motion, he severs the head from the body and uses the warm blood to fuel his ritual. He squeezes the fallen enemy's head directly into the cup, plucks out the eyes, and tosses them into the brew, which slowly shifts into a vibrant, intense green. To finish it off, a heart that is still warm is required, and with this final element, the spell successfully takes its true shape. As the spell nears completion, the sky suddenly turns pitch black. Powerful lightning bolts herald the end of his preparations, and once the sorcerer drops the heart into the cup, a massive explosion of mystical energy erupts. This shockwave instantly extinguishes all the flames in the vicinity. The village remains ruined and destroyed, but there is no longer any sign of the raging fire that previously threatened to level everything in sight. In his weathered hands, only the enemy's heart remains, an organ that now radiates an intense green glow, a light that reflects and takes over his own eyes. As the storm rolls in, a final lightning strike finishes the job. Once the lightning hits the heart directly, it begins to beat with a supernatural rhythm. Immediately after, the sorcerer begins his steady climb to the top of a nearby hill, carrying the pulsing heart fastened to the tip of his wooden staff. For hours, he wanders through the ancient graves of his ancestors, checking them one by one with deep respect and focus, until the heart itself signals exactly where he needs to go. On a hidden stone wall, drawings appear depicting a legendary warrior imbued with flames, clutching an imposing spear in his hand, with all of his defeated enemies lying at his feet. Upon entering the shadows of the cave, the body of a shrouded man rests in one of the deepest corners. In an instant, the heart atop his staff begins to glow with a blinding intensity, and the sorcerer waves it in several directions until the built-up energy finally breaks free, releasing its full power. This mystical force pierces through the bandages of the body on the ground, and immediately after, Lanza, our protagonist, rises from among the dead under the gaze of the sorcerer, whose eyes have now taken on the same vibrant hue as the magic. The old man guides Lanza out of the cave, his body a victim of inevitable decomposition, moves with a slow and clumsy gait, yet every movement carries an overwhelming sense of threat and lethality. Although he no longer looks like an ordinary human, Lanza is now under the sorcerer's absolute control. The old man firmly points him toward the village of the murderers, and after letting out a massive roar that shakes the air, Lanza heads directly there. The moon, which has now taken on an eerie green tint, lights his path toward the enemy village as Lanza tears through the woods, terrifying every creature that crosses his path with his bone-chilling presence. In the creature's village, they are feasting on a macabre spread of human flesh. They all enjoy the fresh meat gathered around the bonfire, completely oblivious to the deadly threat approaching through the shadows. Possessing human-like bodies, but driven by a ravenous and ruthless appetite, they fail to notice Lanza's presence until it is far too late. The massive, heavy mass of muscle is already just a few yards from their camp, preparing to strike with unprecedented ferocity. The creatures quickly grab their crude weapons and huddle into a united front to try and fight him off, shouting guttural war chants in hopes of forcing him to retreat. However, Lanza has no control over his own being or his actions. Behind him, the old sorcerer uses his mystical staff to issue direct commands, and at that moment, the bloody battle officially begins. Using both of his massive fists, Lanza crushes the skull of the first creature. Although the beast managed to pierce his side with a sharp weapon, the warrior showed absolutely no sign of pain or weakness. Following that first kill, they began to die one by one without end succumbed under his unstoppable strength. Some ended up with their necks snapped, and others were simply crushed as they realized far too late that their weapons were entirely useless against the returned giant. One of these creatures tried to scramble away from the chaos, but a pair of glowing green eyes at the edge of the woods caught its attention. They were the exact same green eyes as the giant's, visible even through the thick darkness of the forest trees. When the pulsing heart finally illuminated the sorcerer's face, the creature immediately realized the connection between the two. Without hesitation, it grabbed its spear and hurled it with all its might at the old man, piercing him directly through the chest and killing him instantly. As life drained from the old sorcerer, the vibrant magic in his eyes gradually faded away. At that precise moment, his mental grip began to lose its effect, and the giant came to a dead stop, standing motionless in the middle of the sea of bodies he had left behind. The same creature that murdered the old man decided to seize this sudden vulnerability and struck a brutal blow to his head. The edge of its weapon sheared off a piece of his skull, leaving his brain exposed to the cold air. Seeing a part of his own head lying on the ground without the giant even flinching, the creature understood it wasn't fighting something from this world. Terrified and unable to inflict any more real damage, it chose to flee into the undergrowth, leaving Lanza frozen in the exact same position as before. Standing in the middle of all the dead cannibals submerged in a thick sea of blood, Lanza remains motionless for a while. A few seconds later, he slowly turns his neck to look down at the ground, witnessing firsthand the absolute carnage he has caused with his own strength. So much death and destruction surrounding him is overwhelming. He then looks at his hands, those strong, implacable limbs that are visibly decomposed by time and death. Right then, a small fly appears out of nowhere and lands right on his open eye, which doesn't even flinch at the intrusion. Being unable to feel anything at all finally makes him realize that he is no longer part of this earthly world. The piece of his own brain lying on the ground reveals that he has become something else, an entity that isn't human, yet remains immensely powerful. His decaying body begins to attract more flies, his skin takes on a hideous grayish hue, and his total lack of sensitivity to pain is the ultimate sign that he no longer belongs to the land of the living. He has turned into a sort of wandering zombie. Hours pass in a deathly silence. Lanza stays completely still in that same spot until the first rays of the morning sun hit him. Only after this does he resume his solitary trek into the depths of the forest, his footsteps sounding slow, heavy, and charged with a supernatural determination. But he doesn't stop his march. Shortly after, he manages to reach a small serene lake where several groups of animals have gathered to drink. These creatures, thanks to their keen instincts and senses for danger, flee in terror long before Lanza even emerges from the trees. The giant takes one deliberate step at a time until he finally reaches the muddy shore. There he stands watching his distorted reflection in the water for a few minutes, processing his new nature. However, in an instant, a massive alligator lunges from the depths and snatches him in a lethal bite. The enormous reptile quickly submerges, allowing itself to celebrate the great prey it has successfully hunted. But at that very moment, an agonizing pain forces it to snap its jaws wide open. Lanza, unfazed by the pressure of the beast's grip, has ripped out its tongue in one brutal stroke, and thick blood rapidly stains the water crimson. A short while later, Lanza climbs out of the lake with his usual slow and steady gait. He walks a few yards away from the shore, and immediately after, the crocodile's carcass surfaces floating belly up and lifeless. Just then, it begins to rain heavily over the landscape. The downpour washes the blood from our protagonist's body, and a loud metallic sound powerfully draws his attention toward the thickness of the woods. As he made his tireless way through the deepest part of the forest, the rain never let up. Soon, the water level began to rise drastically until it reached his knees, and what had once been a wooded path had now turned into a treacherous swamp. The strength of the current swept away everything in its path, and among the debris and mud was a man, weakened by extreme exhaustion and unable to stand up to the fury of the flow. The individual was being washed away helplessly by the murky water. Upon seeing Lanza's imposing figure, the man desperately begged him for help. His sharp cries for rescue triggered a sudden flashback in the giant's mind, who discovers for a fleeting moment that his memories are not entirely lost to the darkness of death. Something of his past life still remains hidden within his decaying brain. He only needs to find the right way to access those memories, and perhaps, given time, he might recover at least a fraction of his lost humanity. The visions flashing through his mind are blurry and distorted, yet he can make out silhouettes that he recognizes with clarity. All is not lost for him. As soon as he snaps out of that mental trance, he lunges with renewed strength toward a fallen log further ahead, climbs onto it firmly, and stretches out his long arm to reach the poor man fighting for his life against the current. For a critical moment, the man sinks completely beneath the murky water, but Lanza manages to grab him and pull him to the surface with extreme ease, thanks to his supernatural strength. However, once the man catches his breath and gets a clear look at the decaying face and terrifying appearance of his savior, he falls into an uncontrollable panic and flees desperately. Lanza stands motionless for a few seconds, processing the rejection, but then he sprints forward and manages to cut the man off. He grabs him firmly by the shoulders and lifts him off the ground so he can't escape again. In that moment, the man pulls the veil from his own face, revealing features that don't seem to belong to an ordinary human. His face is full of deep imperfections, and his skin looks as though it has been burned, showing a scratchy, dry, and weathered texture. Thanks to Lanza's unexpectedly kind gestures and protective demeanor, the man finally understands that the creature has no intention of harming him. So, taking the risk of putting his own people in danger, he runs a short distance and then gestures for Lanza to follow. Our protagonist, with his same slow but steady gait, covers a vast distance alongside the strange man, gradually leaving behind the damp coolness of the forest to head deep into the arid, suffocating climate of the desert. Miles upon miles of scorching ground, relentless sandstorms, and climate conditions completely unfit for any ordinary human being are what Lanza must face with determination to reach his final destination. A small village made of makeshift tents in the middle of absolute nowhere gives a warm welcome to their returning brother. He enthusiastically tells them how he was saved from drowning by a mysterious new friend, causing the people who share his same appearance to grow genuinely excited to meet the hero who saved his life. However, when the man finally points out Lanza, who is waiting patiently on a nearby hill under the blistering sun, the community's initial reaction is identical to his own back in the woods. Everyone flees in a sudden panic, terrified by the presence of a creature whose appearance so closely resembles death itself. Some run away in a frenzy toward the horizon, while others quickly hide inside their tents. The only thing they all have in common is that no one wants to get near that terrifying thing. But the man does not give up in the face of his people's fear. Bravely, he gestures for Lanza to approach and carefully guides him through the middle of the camp. This allows those present to observe the giant from their safe spots, realizing that he poses no real danger, and finally enabling them to accept him as one of their own. Dozens of people, their faces deformed by the harsh life under the relentless desert sun, emerge from their huts and approach with the same slow, measured pace that characterizes Lanza. They begin to greet him with curiosity. Some even dare to touch him gently to see if he is real or just a mirage, breaking into a slight smile upon discovering that he is not a wild beast like the ones they have come to know in these lands. The Sandman finally guides him to a large tent, specifically built for someone of his stature. He allows him to enter the shelter and leaves him to rest, making sure to keep the curious onlookers away for the time being to give him some peace. Lanza simply collapses heavily onto a worn rug. He stayed there, motionless, until night fell over the camp. While sitting in the dim light of the tent, he stared fixedly at a scorpion passing by for a couple of minutes. Suddenly, another intense flashback hit him, and in it, he could see strange symbols from his distant past. Although the images weren't entirely clear, he began to draw in the sand what he thought might resemble what he was seeing. But his own mind betrays him in the process. He is forced to relive everything all over again. His mind still doesn't grasp this new life, and he knows it will take a long time to access his memories. Or perhaps all that knowledge is already lost forever. As the sun finally dips below the horizon, the night arrives. The extreme cold forces the sand villagers to take refuge in their huts, but death approaches silently in the form of swift horses and men hidden behind eerie masks. A group of ruthless mercenaries launches a sudden raid on the poor villagers. A coordinated and bloody attack turns the peaceful village into an absolute death zone within minutes. Many perish at the relentless edge of their swords, and those who dare to run for their lives are brutally trampled by the horses galloping between the tents. Spears, knives, and the echo of death's sharp blade are the only things our protagonist can hear from inside his tent. Upon stepping outside, he bears direct witness to the mercenaries murdering adults and children alike without any mercy. The harrowing screams and the violent neighing of the horses trigger another powerful vision in his mind. Another flashback from his past life. Another dark moment where he heard the exact same sounds flashes before him. But this time the memories are heavy with unbearable pain. Immediately after, Lanza's demeanor changes completely and radically. Instead of relying on his usual slow and fearsome pace, he transforms into an implacable and furious beast that attacks the mercenaries with devastating strength, knocking them off their mounts one by one. One of these mercenaries, who was just a split second away from cruelly murdering a defenseless old woman, takes the full brunt of the giant's strength in a brutal blow that knocks him down at the exact right moment, saving her life. With a strike fueled by rage, Lanza crushes his skull instantly, drawing the immediate attention of the rest of the attackers. Instead of backing down, they attempt to trample him with violence, fully confident in the charging power of their horses and the lethal edge of their steel weapons. However, a second before being struck by the lead horse, Lanza manages to stop the massive animal using only one hand. The beast's entire forward momentum collapses as it hits his incredibly strong arm, halting the gallop's impetus dead in its tracks. Immediately after, in a display of supernatural power, Lanza lifts the animal over his head and hurls it away with contempt. The massive weight of the beast crushes its rider upon landing, ending his life on the spot. From his blind spot, another rider seizes the opportunity to attack our hero, who firmly grabs hold of the horse's tail and is dragged through the village sand. Lanza uses that very momentum to launch himself onto the mercenary, and with the precision of an executioner, shatters his skull with a single definitive blow. After the kill, Lanza finds himself mounted on the animal's saddle. The wind whipping against his face and the rhythmic stride of the steed trigger another vivid vision from his distant past. This new image includes his loyal companion, Fang, whom he can finally see with a bit more clarity through the mist of his memory. With zero actual control over the horse, Lanza lets himself be carried away by the familiar sensation and leaves the village at full speed. The mercenaries, unable to let him get away with it, decide to postpone the massacre of the villagers and chase him down with fury across the desert dunes. Using a coordinated barrage of arrows, they manage to pierce Lanza's back several times. One of these arrows severely wounds the horse, which panics from the stinging pain and throws its rider off with a sudden buck. Upon falling, Lanza quickly pushes himself up from the sand, but he immediately takes a series of brutal hits from the mercenaries, who ambush him from every direction, carving deep gashes with their swords while others ruthlessly run him through with their spears. This time, the protagonist actually seems to feel some real pain, causing his rage to channel into a violent outburst. He strikes the horse with immense force and grabs the rider directly with his hands, ripping his arm off in one single motion and beating the man with his own limb until he dies. A few seconds after the carnage, Lanza picks up the lifeless body of the man he just killed and tosses it contemptuously at the feet of his comrades. In that exact moment, the mercenaries finally realize they are no match for this supernatural creature and flee in desperation. They have come to understand that what they are facing holds no trace of humanity. They accept that they cannot defeat him and cling to the common sense of fear to save their own lives. Once the immediate danger vanishes from the horizon, the villagers who managed to survive the raid emerge from their huts, only to gaze sadly upon the devastating aftermath of the confrontation. The man Lanza rescued from the swamp had managed to survive the assault by hiding among the tents. He runs toward him in excitement and thanks him deeply for his heroic help, gesturing for them to return to the village together to celebrate. However, at that moment, something extraordinary happens. A powerful and relentless roar invades his mind, accompanied by a vivid vision of Fang, his loyal companion, who seems to be firmly guiding him in the opposite direction. It is here that Lanza understands his true destiny does not lie in a peaceful village in the middle of the desert. Immediately after, he screams at the sky with all his might and resumes his hurried pace back toward the forest, knowing he still has a long way to go to reclaim his past and discover his future. We pick up the story with a new dawn. A group of creatures enjoys the leaves and the morning dew when their primal instincts suddenly warn them of an impending terror. In an instant, the birds fly far from the ground to seek safety. The rest of the animals take a defensive stance, and a few seconds later, with a series of alarming sounds, they warn everyone that it is time to flee. From a distance, we see Spear slowly approaching them with a chilling and unwavering determination. But ignoring them completely, the massive zombie walks in a single direction. He doesn't turn around, he doesn't pick up the pace, and he simply walks through everything in front of him. It doesn't matter if it is dirt, thick brush, or even crossing a deep river without the slightest fear of being attacked by something larger lurking in the depths. Spear continues his relentless advance, covering a great distance across those desolate lands until a new vision from his past memories emerges in his mind. This time he sees his faithful Fang once again, but the animal is being brutally attacked, awakening an echo of old pain within him as he keeps moving forward without stopping for anything. Even though the image in his mind isn't entirely clear, the right direction certainly seems to be. Spear changes his course immediately, makes a sharp 45-degree turn, and resumes his steady pace. Behind him, we can see the passing of days, nights, and various sunsets. His hollow stare and his somewhat clumsy yet constant stride are the only things we can observe during his long journey across the wilderness. Soon, he finally leaves the lush forest trees behind to venture deep into the desert, where the jagged mountains and the harsh, arid sun are the only things accompanying him on his lonely trek. As night falls, he finally comes to a halt, standing completely still for a few seconds before letting out a strange, faint roar that emerges from deep within his gut. Immediately after, a massive beast shaped like a giant worm erupts from the sand, with a colossal size and a row of razor-sharp teeth ready to devour him. The enormous creature rises above the dunes, poised to attack with ferocity. Despite facing certain death, Spear remains motionless. The massive worm slowly approaches him, placing its maw right in front of his face while letting out a terrifying roar that would freeze the blood of any living being. But Spear is no longer part of the world of the living. He possesses no dread, pain, or fear within him, so he just stands there staring at the creature until a new memory surfaces in his mind, showing him a shadow quite different from the one currently in front of him. Spear realizes that this is not the creature he is actually looking for, prepares to take a step back, and as soon as he gets the chance, he takes off at a run. With a hurried pace and an expression of absolute urgency, he tears through the desert at high speed, zigzagging skillfully to avoid the beast's constant attacks as it sinks into the sand and reemerges right beneath his feet with the clear intent of devouring him. Shortly after, he manages to get far enough away to reach the edge of a cliff. Before the creature can reach him, he plunges into the unknown void, only to discover that the bottom is a deadly trap of man-eating thorns. The branches tangle tightly around his arms and legs, piercing his pale skin, completely pinning him down and putting him in an extremely dangerous situation from which there seems to be no immediate escape. As the worm draws closer, it devours everything in its path. Spear ends up slammed directly against its massive jaws, while hundreds of thorn-laden branches painfully pierce his skin, until he eventually hits a solid stone wall. The enormous worm bursts through the mountain with sheer brute force. Upon emerging on the other side, Spear manages to break free from its grip for a brief moment, and the beast pulls away in a sign of temporary retreat. Seeing it leave, our hero turns back toward the direction he had in mind and prepares to continue his journey without looking back. But before he can leave the conflict behind for good, the worm resurfaces beneath his feet, catching him in its maw filled with razor-sharp teeth and applying deadly pressure. Spear, determined that this will not be his end, stretches out his arms and, with his new superhuman strength, holds the creature's mouth open long enough for it to tire and finally let go. Immediately after, Spear bites back, tearing away a chunk of its body with one strike, and the worm wails in intense pain as it coils up in a sign of surrender. However, this is just another one of its tricks. When Spear tries to leave, the creature lashes its tail toward him, snags him, and coils around him with unsurpassable strength. At that moment, the sun rises majestically over the dunes. Its rays fall upon the worm's head, and it begins to burn instantly, as if it was some cursed creature of the night. Before suffering more severe damage from the sunlight, the worm buries itself once more into the depths, dragging Spear down with it. But our hero manages to break free and escape just in time, crawling out of the hole with what little strength he has left after the brutal struggle. His body, which now clearly shows the marks of the recent battle, does not falter in his relentless quest. The visions repeat in his mind, pointing out the exact path to follow. Immediately after, Spear resumes his pace once more toward his destination. Slow, tireless, but steady, he moves through the desert, where the incessant sun and the arid ground never stop hitting him with everything they've got. For days, he continues forward without stopping, while flies and other scavenging insects are inevitably drawn toward his strong, decaying scent. All around him, the few trees seem to melt into the ground, as if consumed by the sun's blistering heat. The only thing that seems to lose absolutely nothing as the days pass by in this desolate wasteland. Suddenly, Spear stumbles upon a giant fly, a massive insect that has been uncontrollably drawn to the delicious scent of his rotting flesh and exposed brains. The enormous creature lands right in front of him with a deafening buzz. Its wings flap powerfully, chasing away the rest of the smaller bugs. For several long minutes, they just stare at each other in a tense silence, as if waiting to see who will make the first move to strike. But nothing actually happens because Spear is hit by another sudden vision. This time he sees himself as a human, holding his weapon in his hand with an expression of pure bewilderment in his eyes. His human self walks slowly toward him, stands face to face, and observes him closely, as if he couldn't grasp the nature of what he's looking at. Right after this, the rain begins to pour down heavily over the desert. However, it's not water falling from the sky, but liquid fire instead. A blistering fire that scorches his human version and makes him let out bone-chilling screams of agony that force him to recoil. Spear desperately tries to help his counterpart, but the fire attacks him as well. With every single drop that strikes his dead flesh, it burns deeper and deeper, leaving his white bones completely exposed to the elements. In a heartbreaking moment, our protagonist collapses heavily to the ground, and his body soon transforms into a burning skeleton. Flames pour furiously from both his mouth and his eyes as the definitive end comes for them both. However, it all turns out to be a terrible nightmare born from his fragmented mind. Spear wakes up in the middle of nowhere, soaked by a normal rain that doesn't hurt his body, but seems to drown his hopes of finding what he is searching for so desperately. The zombie wakes to the familiar cracking of the ground beneath his feet, the same unsettling sound made by the beast that tasted his flesh flesh just a few days ago. Quickly, Spear climbs a dead tree. He knows perfectly well that staying at ground level is a guaranteed death sentence with that deadly worm lurking nearby. Once the rain stops and the sun appears on the horizon, the threat of the worm completely dissipates. Spear resumes his determined pace toward the mountain, a massive rock formation that he must climb slowly and steadily until finally reaching a deep cave halfway up the trail. There he notices a small opening, which grows much larger as he approaches, hiding a massive secret deep within its dark recesses. Inside the cave lies a hidden city, featuring crystal clear waters and trees with vibrant green leaves, a striking contrast to the arid desert wasteland that surrounds it completely. Spear walks with curiosity through the walled corridors and observes the totems of figures he doesn't recognize, until finally reaching an even larger door, where glowing green eyes reveal themselves in the deep darkness. Upon seeing them, a new vision flashes through his mind, and immediately after, a familiar roar catches his full attention. Spear stands still in front of the entrance, motionless, waiting to see his old friend emerge from the shadows of the chamber. But in one of the now familiar disappointments of his journey, a lion lets the sunlight hit its coat. The massive beast lunges downward, leaving its high ground, and stands defiantly right in front of Spear. Little by little, the predator begins to circle him, analyzing his posture and looking for weak spots with cunning precision. It throws a few quick swipes at him, but misses its initial attempt. Spear, for his part, is unable to defend himself. He simply stands there motionless, waiting for the slashes of the lion's claws to tear through his rotting skin at any moment. The lion grabs him violently by the shoulder with its jaws, sinking its fangs down to the bone and triggering a wild fury that surges within Spear, who finally strikes back with devastating power. He catches the beast with his hands and wraps them around its neck. With a couple of blows charged with his otherworldly strength, he turns the tide of the battle, but the beast isn't finished with its attack yet. With its hind legs, the animal manages to slash a deep gash across his face just before Spear lifts the lion over his head and hurls it against a stone structure with so much force that the lion destroys everything in its path upon impact. Nothing else emerges from the pile of rubble. The first feline has been defeated. Spear lets out a roar of victory that echoes through the cave, but the battle is far from over. A lioness appears menacingly from the ridge to his left. Her sharp fangs show him clearly that the fight continues, and at her side, another male lion emerges from the deep darkness of the caves. It's now a 2-on-1 fight, which quickly turns into an entire pride of felines surrounding our hero in a deadly circle of hungry predators ready to strike. The camera pans in a full circle, showing Spear with no real chance of escape. The pride has him completely cornered, and their glowing green eyes are an imminent death sentence. One by one, the lions roar with great ferocity, signaling to their brothers the exact moment they should strike. In that tense instant, Spear has another vision of his past, remembering the time he was hunted by a creature far more terrifying than these four-legged felines stalking him now. Immediately after, he takes off running once again toward the exit. He relies on distance and quick zigzagging movements to try and create a gap between himself and his predators. However, one of the lionesses lunges violently onto his back. Her claws sink deep into his spine, and her fangs drastically slow his pace. Shortly after, another female lands on his back, nearly managing to knock him down completely. Then, she bites his neck with brutal force, causing him to stumble across the stone floor. Behind them, the male lions just watch coldly. The females of the pride always handle these hunting situations, and our hero is just moments away from becoming dinner for these beasts. Before giving up for good, Spear gives everything he's got left, carrying 3 furious lionesses on his back. His heavy footsteps crack the ground beneath his feet until the structure finally gives way, causing everyone to plummet into the void. It is a deep abyss filled with darkness and freezing water. Spear sinks inevitably to the very bottom. Being undead, he doesn't need oxygen to survive in the depths, so he remains calm beneath the surface. It's a real shame that the lions actually need to breathe. The bodies of the felines, exhausted and unable to escape the current, sink shortly after around him, lifeless. They all drown while Spear continues his way toward the faint light coming from a door in the distance. With a firm and determined stride, he emerges from the water, trekking through the dimly lit corridors of the area until he reaches a doorway of light that promises an exit. However, before he can reach it, a pair of lions slam into him violently from his blind spot. Tired and fed up with their persistent presence, Spear faces them both with nerves of steel, grabs the largest one with his hands, and savagely bites its face, ripping out one of its eyes in the process. The lioness behind him pins him down and presses her heavy paw onto his head, but it doesn't take Spear long to recover. Grab her firmly by the legs and slam her against her mate with unusual cruelty. Over and over again, the massive zombie thrashes the lioness's body as if she were a piece of old clothing he was trying to beat dry. The animal's warm blood covers everything completely, while the protagonist lets out deafening battle cries to demonstrate his absolute superiority over the predators. From outside the cave, the sounds of Spear massacring the remaining lions echo clearly, and we can see another very different creature patiently waiting for him to emerge. In its piercing yellow eyes, one can see the burning rage of a deep-sea few seconds later, completely covered in the thick blood of the lions he has just exterminated with his bare hands. Just outside the cave, a new pride waits anxiously to tear him to shreds. But before the bloody banquet can begin, something unexpected happens. A massive gray lion of colossal proportions towers over all the others. With a single authoritative gesture, he makes his brothers back off immediately and claims the prey for himself. Spear, standing completely still as he stares at the massive animal, can only try to run desperately when the beast lunges at him. However, he doesn't manage to get very far in his escape attempt. The giant feline catches him easily between its powerful jaws, shakes him violently from side to side, and then tosses him away like a simple broken toy. Our hero, far from having a clear chance to defeat the creature, remains still on the ground until the precise moment to strike arrives. In a quick and lethal move, he snatches away the sight from the beast's right side with a single blow. He takes advantage of those brief seconds of confusion to try and flee, but suddenly stumbles upon an ancient skeleton holding a spear very similar to the one he owned when he was still alive. Upon touching the weapon's cold metal, forgotten memories rush back to him. Immediately, he turns with determination toward the massive lion and charges with his weapon in hand for one last definitive encounter. The beast charges with everything it has toward our hero, and he does exactly the same. In a decisive moment, he leaps into the air and drops his full weight onto his enemy, piercing its mouth with the spear. The blade hits the ground even before the lion's heavy body does. The spear has completely impaled his rival, followed by its lifeless body and the blood covering everything. At the end of the struggle, the lions that were waiting for their moment to strike decide to retreat and allow the hero to go his way. Spear leaves the citadel behind, leaving his weapon there, walking toward the sunset and resuming his journey as he recovers fragments of his memories in the process.
উফ, কি শীত রে ভাই! কিন্তু ওই দেখ বল্টু, গাছে হাড়ি ঝুলতেছে, জিভে জল চলে আসলো। তুই নিচে পাহারা দে, আমি এখনই হাড়ি নামায় আনতেছি।
হেই,
দোস্ত তাড়াতাড়ি কর, আমার কিন্তু কেমন জানি ভয় ভয় করতেছে। আল্লাহ রে, মাটি তো দেখি অনেক নিচে, পড়লে তো হাড়ও খুঁজে পাওয়া যাবে না।
পাইছি তরে। আজ এক ফোঁটাও রাখমু না, সব পেটে যাইবো।
কি রে, গাছের মগডালে সাদা কাপড় কেন? কেউ কি লুঙ্গি শুকাইতে দিছে? কি রে, লবণ আনছিস? লবণ ছাড়া রস জমবে না তো। হ্যাঁ, ভূত লবণ দিয়া রস খায়? ওরে বাবা রে বাবা! ভূত না বেটা, আমি তোর বাপ। চোরের জ্বালায় নিজের গাছের রস পাহারা দিচ্ছি।
ওরে মারে, বাঁচা! ভূত না আব্বু।
দাঁড়া পাজি, আজ তোকে আমি লবণের ছিটা দিচ্ছি। দাঁড়া দাঁড়া।
মার মার! আরে গ্লোয়াল ফেল, রিভাইভ দে।
শিটিয়ার, জোন চলে আসছে, দৌড়া দৌড়া।
ইয়ামিন, ও কি রে, কার সাথে কথা বলছিস?
ওরে বাবা, কে এলো? নিউটন আপেল তলায় বসিয়াছিলেন এবং আপেলটি পড়িল।
এত জোরে জোরে কিসের আপেল পড়ছিল রে?
না মানে আম্মু,
আমি তো ফিজিক্স পড়ছিলাম।
বিজ্ঞানের কত উন্নতি!
বিজ্ঞানের উন্নতি তো বুঝলাম, কিন্তু তোর বই উল্টো কেন? ওহ, আসলে আম্মু, এটা তো মিরর থিওরি। উল্টো করে পড়লে ব্রেন শার্প হয়। তা তোর এই আপেল কি কথা বলতে পারে?
হেল্প মি!
মানে আপেলের নিচে মোবাইল কেন? আর মোবাইল থেকে হেল্প মি আওয়াজ আসছে কেন?
আম্মু, বিশ্বাস করো,
নিউটন মোবাইলে আপেল নিয়ে রিসার্চ করছিল। দাঁড়া, আজ তোকে আমি নিউটনের সূত্র দিয়ে পিটাবো। বাঁচাও! হ্যাকার হ্যাকার